Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Tesla stock down about 1/3 of 1% at the time of recording this video. But boy, do we have big news. This is about to skyrocket markets. If it's true in the China negotiations, this is going to be a big deal, let alone the obvious trade deal that hopefully comes out of this meeting that is taking place tomorrow that could extend even today, and could extend into tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, we will cover all of your broader market news today and Tesla specific news. Get ready. Let's get started. Okay, this is big news. Trump allows flexibility on China export controls. Before U.S.-China trade talks in London, President Trump authorized negotiators to ease recent export restrictions on key technologies. This move, driven by China's rare earth controls, is an unprecedented use of export controls as trade leverage. Restricted items include jet engine parts, chip-making software, and ethane for plastics, critical for China's industries. This is what I talked about over the weekend. Simple. I knew this was coming. In exchange for China's rare earths, in which the US wants, China wants our, export controls lifted, which the main one is NVIDIA semiconductors. Why do you think NVIDIA did well on Friday and is doing well today? Same is true for AMD. AMD's up 3.5% today. What about Nebius? Nebius is up 11%. What about CoreWeave? Oops, wrong one. CoreWeave up 11.5% today. This is very positive for the semiconductor industry. If NVIDIA is allowed to sell in China and there's less restrictions on what can, take place in China. This started last week. Now, this is not confirmed yet, but again, I believe export controls on NVIDIA into the Chinese market are going to be lifted, and this would be huge for broader markets, like the headline S&P, but for all AI stocks. This, in my view, along with a trade deal with China, is going to cause markets to soar past your prior all-time highs. This is a big catalyst that could be coming in the next 24 hours. And here's another headline. Trump lets U.S. Treasury Secretary Bessent levy tech sale controls and lets negotiators weigh lifting export controls in China talks. I think that is the only thing that really stands between a U.S.-China trade deal, is the restrictions on both sides. China's rare earth restrictions and the U.S.'s mainly semiconductor restriction. Now, a Fox reporter on X says a Treasury official says there is no set end time for talks between the U.S. and China over trade. The U.S. delegation wants them to unfold organically to allow substantive talks. So it could last a while. It could go into tomorrow, but we're going to get more headlines and hopefully we get an actual trade deal out of these talks. Now, according to the New York Fed survey today, May year-end ahead inflation expectations fell to 3.2% from 3.6%. That is very positive on the day today as well. Longer-term expectations also declined. Consumers see a slower rise in gas, medical, rent, and their job outlook and personal finances improved. So some really good news from the New York Fed survey today. And within the survey, for May, households lowered expectations of missing debt payments, and consumers' outlook on the job market improved in May. Mexico's President Sheinbaum says it is very likely that she will meet Trump in the G7. Canada's Prime Minister Carney says Canada should no longer send 75% of defense capital to the US. And Canada's Prime Minister Carney says we're going to create a new AI research institute called Borealis. U.S. wholesale inventories month over month came in at 0.2%. The forecast was 0%, and the previous month was 0.0%. So this should be positive for GDP, at least a little bit. U.S. wholesale sales month over month came in at 0.1%. Forecast was 0.3%, and the previous month was 0.6%. That is not as good. Consumer credit blew past expectations, coming in at positive 17.87 billion versus the 10 billion expectation. So yeah, people are spending on credit. Elon's father says that the Trump dispute was triggered by intense stress and it has to end. The dispute between Donald Trump and Elon Musk was triggered by months of intense stress on both sides, and the public battle between the US president and the billionaire donor needs to stop, Musk's father told Reuters on Monday. And how wild is California? Newsom is suing the Trump admin over National Guard deployment when they couldn't even control LA. Piper Sandler says the U.S. economy doesn't need rate cuts. After a solid jobs report Friday, investors aren't expecting a Fed rate cut until September, according to positioning in futures markets. But though the economy may be headed for a softer stretch, it still enjoys tailwinds that will keep the momentum going even if the Fed doesn't cut. Nancy Lazar of Piper Sandler writes, for one thing, last year's Fed rate cuts still probably haven't taken their full effect yet, given typical lag, she writes. For another, downsizing of the federal government will free up labor for the private sector, she projects. Quote, our bottom line is that the U.S. economy does not need more rate cuts, Lazar writes. Today's soft patch is a function of the tariff policy roller coaster. And here's a headline. It says U.S.-China hold trade talks in London. This was at 8:30 in the morning today, so these talks started very early. The meeting is expected to extend into the UK evening and might spill into Tuesday. But I do think by tonight, we're probably going to get some headlines coming out. Hassett says that the U.S. to release export controls if China talks go well. White House senior advisor Hassett says the U.S. expects export controls will be eased and rare earths will be released in volume. And he says the U.S. side is seeking a handshake on rare earths agreement from China in this London meeting. And the White House advisor Hassett says U.S.-China meeting today to be short but bear results. So, very kind of conflicting. Some people say these talks could go into tomorrow. Hassett says they're going to be short. You're already many hours into the talks. So, again, I think we're going to get news later on today. And Hassett says, I am absolutely expecting progress from U.S.-China talk. China says rare earth controls don't target specific nations. And China says its regulation of rare earths is not a countermeasure. Citigroup raised their 2025 year-end price target for the S&P to 6,300, up from the previous 5,800 today. The percent of stocks trading above their 50-day moving average coming in at 74.5% on the higher side. Again, this really has to do with correlation, just meaning a lot of stocks are participating in this market, which is a good thing. Okay, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. The CNN Fear and Greed Index today coming in at, let's give this a second to refresh, 63. Market momentum still in fear. Stock price strength is greed. Stock price breadth, extreme greed. Put and call options, greed. Market volatility is neutral. Safe haven demand in greed, and junk bond demand also in greed. The AI investor sentiment survey, we will get a new one on Thursday. Again, as we've talked about before, over the past 2 weeks, people have remained pretty steadfast in kind of their positions. Looks like about 41.4% of investors are bearish, 32.7% are bullish, and 25.9% are neutral. So there's almost 10% more bears than bulls. Again, that's kind of wild. Now let's get into some of your Tesla stock news today. Argus downgrades Tesla to a hold from a buy, and Bard downgrades Tesla to neutral from outperform, which is essentially a hold. The analyst says Tesla's 24% rise despite a weak quarter versus the S&P 500's 13% is partly due to excitement over the upcoming affordable car and robotaxi launch in June. We think Musk is overly optimistic about the robotaxi rollout, and much of the hype is already priced in. His ties to Trump also add uncertainty. Tesla remains a strong long-term pick, but we're staying on the sidelines for now, which is the funniest thing. Like, you could say it's a strong long-term pick, but yeah, the stock's off of all-time highs. The stock was just $280 per share. Now you want to sit on the sidelines? Wall Street is going to want to jump into Tesla during the rally. They don't want to buy when the stock's low. They want to buy when the stock's high. It's the most ass-backwards shit you'll ever see. And that's why long-term retail investors outperform Wall Street almost every time. Now, Bard also adjusted the price target down to $320 per share. They expect 6,000 Tesla robotaxis on the road by the second half of 2026. They concede a presence in the space is probably more important than how many robotaxis hit the road, but argue Tesla faces a more difficult and possibly less profitable business than what is being priced in by investors. We talked about this in the last video. The more robotaxis roll out, if it is unprofitable, the larger the loss will be, the bigger the burden on profitability will be. So that is a little bit of a trade-off. We'll have to see if the robotaxi is just a big money loser, or if it is somewhat break even. But it would grow revenue. It would grow top line revenue. So that would be the positive. The negative would be maybe Tesla's loss gets a little bit bigger. Either way, this is a big net positive coming on Thursday. And 6,000 Tesla robotaxis on the road by the second half of 2026. That is like 10 times the amount that Waymo is going to have on the road by then. Like, Tesla is top dog, if that's true, in robotaxis. Waymo cannot even compete with those kind of numbers. Now, also in the news today, via the LA riots, or protest, whatever you want to call them, multiple self-driving Waymo cars, collectively worth upwards of $600,000, were vandalized by protesters yesterday. There were 3 Waymos that were completely burnt down, and 5 total that were vandalized, which represent about 0.4% of the entire fleet and cost almost $1 million. Now, Tesla teases an upcoming 7-seat Model Y in a new email to customers. They say, quote, ready for anything with long range, seating for up to 7, and enough room for everyone's gear. GM has unveiled the Cadillac Optiq V EV, the performance variant of the Optiq EV, with a starting price of $68,800. And despite being enacted in April of 2025, a controversial tax on electric vehicles in the UK appears to already be on the chopping block. According to the so-called Tesla tax, car buyers must pay hundreds of extra pounds for any vehicle that cost over 40,000 euros, about 54,000 US dollars. First enacted in 2017, the tax previously only applied to gas-powered vehicles. In April, EVs were included in the ECS to add a level of fairness. However, that move has been met with backlash, with EV manufacturers blaming the tax for declining sales. Some manufacturers have even floated the idea of shying away from EV production, which would greatly impact net zero policies already in place. Now, option activity today from hedge funds and institutions in Tesla, and not super great at all. You have 85 different trades totaling $123 million with a positive order value of 16%. So definitely on the rough side. You have 460,000 shares today that are being covered on. So shorts look like net, that they're net covering. So that looks pretty good. You have 3.04% short interest of free float, $25.16 billion sold short in Tesla, totaling 85.23 million shares. I think on Thursday, if we get a China trade deal in the next 24 or 48 hours, something like that, and you get the robotaxi launch on Thursday that goes well, I think you could be setting up for a very large rally in Tesla stock. And I think a lot of Wall Street is just missing it. That's the bottom line. They're missing what's happening. And it's right in front of us. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in the next video, but I think we could be due for a rally that sends Tesla stock back into the 400s. I think the market, upon a China trade deal in and of itself, is going to be pretty euphoric. I mean, again, as I've talked about before, if this rally was going to fail, it's going to fail here, right? It's going to fail before you get to a new all-time high. Wall Street's going to turn bullish on Tesla again once we get to new all-time highs. Once you hit new all-time highs, markets tend to hit more new all-time highs. It doesn't tend to be a big rally and then just one all-time high. All-time highs tend to precede new all-time highs, right? So once you break that prior high is when people are really going to get bullish on this market again. But again, we'll talk about this more in the next video. Ladies and gentlemen, hit that like button as well as subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one.